Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining our session this morning. I'll give you a little bit of information about Phil, and then he'll just do his presentation. So we've got Philip Gleason. He's a father of 7, grandfather of 30, and a great-grandfather of 4. He has a background in construction and property development. Current projects include developing agriculture cooperative communities in Utah and Arizona under the Operation Self-Reliance Initiative, which is OSR. Future projects include development in Idaho, Wyoming, and Canada. Our OSR helps families transition from a city lifestyle of dependencies to the country culture with like-minded neighbors while maintaining debt-free. So with that, let's welcome Philip.
Thank you very much. It's good to be with you. I'm going to start the timer here because we can keep track of the time. I'd like to leave 10 minutes at the end for questions. But a couple questions right here. Who all is involved in decision making in zoning? Okay, 1, 2, great. Who all is interested in the zoning requirements? Okay, a lot of us. I appreciate that. And the reason I bring that up is I want to know the audience that I'm talking to situation. Because when you're going into a county, there's a whole lot of different ideas about how things should be done. And our approach as we went into counties is we're not interested in muscling our way. We've wanted to be the best neighbor. And so it's taken a while to understand our audience and then also for them to understand what we're doing, what we're trying to create. So scalable, sustainable communities. All right. Who all is familiar with this? Prepare every needful thing. Can I see that have heard? So that gives me another little idea. All right. Preparing every needful thing. Operation Self-Reliance. We're going to be talking about that. That's OSR. And self-reliance begins inside. Okay. It's an internal issue. Self-sufficiency is what's manifest from self-reliance. Most people are not interested in being self-reliant. It's too much work. It's too much work. But at the same time, it creates a dichotomy, a challenge, because if you're not interested in being self-reliant, then who's going to take care of you? Who's going to take care of grandma? Who's going to take care of the grandson or the granddaughter? So these are considerations. You have to really determine what is it you want. All right. If our air was to shut off, what kind of priority would that happen? Okay. You really want air. Now, down the road, you may want some water. You may want some food. You may want some shelter. But you have to decide what it is you really want. And a lot of people, because of the current environment that we have, they don't know what to want. It's too challenging. It's too unstable. We've heard a lot of comments already. I've really appreciated the presenters so far. And it's nice to have Nate with us. I enjoyed his presentation last night. He understands what he wants and what he's worked for and the blood and the sweat and the tears. Now, once you determine what is wanted, you have to understand why. Because no matter what course you choose, you're going to run into challenges. And if you don't understand why you want to do something, then if it gets difficult or if there's not enough resources in one's opinion, then you'll deviate. And so You become like the farmer that had to go out and feed the cows. On the way, he went to go through the gate and he realized it was broken. So he went to get a hammer. And as he went to get the hammer, he realized that the chickens were out. Noon came around and the animals hadn't been fed. So you really need to understand what you want. And we're going to be discussing some of those things and why. Because the why determines your sustainability. And so your problem solving. So if it becomes challenging and your why isn't really stable, it's easy to get diverted. Operation Self-Reliance. I'm going to share a personal story. This took place a while ago. I was in Mountain Home, Idaho with my wife and our 3 little children, 3 little girls that were 3 and under. And we were following construction. I was involved in electrical. I was electrical superintendent on a project, actually the foreman. And in the beginning, it was only supposed to be a 6-month project. Turned out being 18 months. So we ended up going through the winter. And in Mountain Home, Idaho, now that 3-year-old is currently 50 years old right now, has 9 children and a bunch of grandchildren. And so this was a ways back. But winter came and the holidays came, and we decided to go to Grandma and Grandpa's down in Preston, Idaho. And the weather had been relatively mild. So we had enjoyed propane lasting 2 weeks. So we didn't give it a thought. We were only going to be a week. Well, we went, and as a young couple, we enjoyed Grandma and Grandpa for the week, but it turned bitter cold. And so on our way back from Mountain Home, Idaho, when we got to the trailer park, much to our surprise, now this was at midnight, Sunday night. Excuse me. And in Mountain Home, Idaho back then, nothing was open. Nothing. And we got to the trailer and our propane had run out. Well, it was bitter cold. It was almost 0 degrees outside. It was almost 0 degrees inside. And we had these 3 baby girls in there. And we couldn't give them a drink. We couldn't feed them. This was before wet wipes. So it was challenging changing diapers. But we did have an electric blanket. And so on the pull-out bed, the hide-a bed, where Mom and Dad slept, we put the 3 baby girls in there, and we put all of our blankets on them, turned the electric blanket up high, put our coats on top, and we were okay. We had everybody stabilized. 3 a.m. in the morning, the power for the whole trailer park went out. It only took a half hour before that cold got to my babies, and we were unable to keep them warm. For the next 3 hours, while I was waiting for the gas station, that rewired my brain. Because having your babies cry and not being able to do anything about it, it changed me. That was the beginning of my path on being self-reliant. The very next day, I had 3 other forms of heat. Since then, I've done presentations and found out that in our kitchens, our bathrooms, and our garages, we have almost 20 different sources of heat that you can utilize. So knowledge is a key element. So intelligence, we deal with what is intelligence? The ability to acquire knowledge, the skill to use it, and the wisdom to know when. So at 75 years old, I'm a little different than I was when I was 25 years old. Now I want to share another story with you. Brigham City, your neighbor right down the road here. They had an interesting situation. And I'm not going to read this whole thing, and these slides will be made available through Jesse Fisher. If you're interested in it, we'll show you on that. But Lorenzo Snow, he was a leader back then. He took 50 families and they established Brigham City. And he was tasked with creating a cooperative. Okay, a cooperative is a mechanism where a group of people can do something that would be difficult for a single individual to do. Does that make sense? Okay, many hands make light work. In fact, in co-ops here in the United States, there's over 30,000 co-ops. And a lot of times, like housing co-ops, there's like 5 different types of co-ops. And so we don't have time to go in those, but we're going to be touching on a lot of issues that is complex cooperative enterprise that's essentially done with private capital and education. Okay, we keep coming back to this intelligence, this knowledge, this skill set. It's important because a lot of the skill sets that our progenitors had, we've either lost or set aside, but we're finding that life is changing. It's the American dream is getting more and more challenging. But again, if you have some knowledge, you can see opportunity. So they created this, they formalized the organization. It was in the 1870s. It was incorporated December 15th. And it was amazing. They had 7 directors. And what they did is they started inviting individuals to start creating product. Might be food, might be eggs, might be milk, might be cheese, might be leather goods, might be hats. As they developed this, they started a co-op store. Now, as you're thinking about this, I want you to start thinking of your neighborhoods. What can you do in your neighborhoods to become more sustainable, self-reliant? You can see through the whole list. There's a ton of things here. But what also happened was there was a panic in 1873 worldwide, and tremendous hardship around the world. But what was actually happening, Brigham City was 85% self-reliant, self-sufficient. In other words, instead of bringing everything in from back east, where they would mark it up 3, 4, 5, 6, 1,000%, take that cash and ship it back east, they were able to circulate those dollars through their community. To the point they had sufficient success, they were able to start building homes for the widows. They had amazing program going. And then they had a major fire that they hadn't accounted on, which took out their woolen mill and a bunch of their other stock. They made a critical error. They borrowed money. They borrowed money, and within keep everything going the way it was, instead of going back and doing it how they built it, a little piece at a time, instead of retaining that, they went into debt. Within 5 years, it was dissolved. Now, that didn't stop, but we ended up with over 150 some co-ops during Brigham Young's time. Again, a group of people doing things that would be difficult for a single individual. I want to introduce you to Riverbed Ranch. That's a community that was started 6 years ago. Pardon? Oh, gotcha. Riverbed Ranch which the legal name is the Utah OSR Land Cooperative, created under Title III. Title III is set up for nonprofit agricultural cooperatives and associations. In my opinion, it's one of the finest pieces of legislation that we have in the Utah Code. And we'll talk a little bit more about it. But what you're seeing right here, and 2018, and I'm going to confess right here, just let you know, I'm not smart enough to come up with this. And I spent some time and I asked the man up above, what do you want me to do? And he says, I want you to do a co-op. And I go, okay, great. I can do a co-op. I can get 10 people together and we can do a bulk purchase. That works. Then I can go fishing and play with my grandkids and stuff like that. It turned out I was supposed to do something a little bit different. So over a period of time in 2018, in the spring to the summer, about 3 months there between the hours of 2 a.m. and 5 a.m., I received instructions. Okay, you can believe that or not believe it, but if you know me, you know I'm not smart enough to have come up with all the things that needed to do this. And what we ended up with was 24 slides with a concept of creating an off-grid, self-reliant, sustainable community made up of sustainable off-grid homesteads. And what you see right here is from those 24 slides, we just went out, me, myself, and I, to start with, and my wife was terrified. I'm taking these 24 slides and say, what do you think of this? And it was interesting, it resonated. And pretty soon we had 5 people, 5 families. Then we had 15 families, and then we had 30 families, and then we've had up to 130 families, and still growing because of the concept. And these are actual pictures of work that's taking on. Now, in my mind, because I'm a builder, I'm thinking dirt and buildings. It's amazing what's happened when you get cooperative activity going on where people know what they're doing and why. And what you'll see right here is these are volunteers that are helping put up a house. They're neighbors. Now they're doing their own homesteads, and we get together like on a Sunday night, and it's called a residence meeting, and we say, well, this is what we did last week. This is what worked. By the way, don't do this. This will totally crap out on you. And by the way, if anybody has any time Wednesday at 10 o'clock, we're going to put the plastic on my greenhouse so I could use some help. It's amazing what happens when people own something together but have their own stewardship, and they're trying to be self-reliant, but I've never seen such dedicated people to helping each other. Okay, I'm 75 years old. While I've been out here, I've had 2 heart attacks, ended up with 5 stents. And then when I was with my wife last year in the hospital because she had a stroke, and I had just planted all kinds of seeds. Felt really impressed that I needed to get my greenhouse going and my garden and stuff like that. And then I end up 5 floors below her getting a double bypass. And I thought, the Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. This really sucks. I put all this work and it's just going to die. 2 days later, I got a call from my neighbor. Says, oh, we're meeting at your place tomorrow and divvying up the water process, the irrigation. And I said, whoa, that's nice. It took me 3 months before I got back, but when I showed back up, I had the Garden of Eden there. And people were thanking me for the opportunity to water my garden because they saw what was possible. I was thanking them just because. That's the type of people who want to be self-reliant. She mentioned in the beginning, what we do is we help families transition from a city lifestyle of dependencies to a country culture of self-reliance with like-minded neighbors who want to be debt-free. Being on the original board and the CEO, one of my responsibilities was to interview potential members. And we look for people who want to be self-reliant. Second of all, people who have integrity. Third of all, people who like people. Working in a co-op is not like going out into the backcountry so you can hide for whatever reason. In a co-op, well, let me give you a real life example. My wife and I got COVID. We were in our RV. We'd been building up our homestead, and we had a terrible time getting any rest because people kept knocking on the door, saying, "Here, try this tincture. Here's some fruit. Here's your meal for the night. By the way, how you doing?" "Well, we were trying to get a nap. This is what happens when you surround yourself with like-minded people. Again, people who want to be self-reliant, people who have integrity, people who like people, but also people who understand choices have consequences. So if you're using Roundup, spraying along your fence line, you're going to be affecting your neighbor. Now, you may like Roundup, you may not. But my point being is, when you're neighbors, you affect each other. Choices have consequences. And then you have to have some resources. Now, resources might be knowledge, it might be finances, it might be several things, but you need to be able to do what you say you're going to do. Now, over that 3 months, I was shown a lot of things. I was shown how to put the co-op together. And we had miracle after miracle. We don't have time to go into a lot of these things. We were shown how to put the co-op together. We were shown how it was going to affect Dad. And that was easy for me because being a builder and kind of a prepper after having that experience with my babies, I actually was shown how's it going to affect Mom. Then how's it going to affect the teenagers? How's it going to affect the young people? And so different elements needed to be incorporated in a sustainable community. And also, I was told that this particular first one that we would end up with 250 members. Now keep in mind, I thought, okay, 10, we can do it by. But I was shown before we had any land or any money, we wanted to plan for 250. We later found out with our research that the co-ops all around the world, the ones that last generationally, they need to have 200 members. And you need to have 1,000 acres at least. And it was interesting. We ended up with the first piece of property, 1,245 acres, which was set up for the 250, which gives you an average of 5 acres per person. But that doesn't mean every person got the 5 acres because you got your 2 acres, and then the other 3 acres were used for common activities, roads, right-of-ways, parks, cooperative other activities like an RV park, like a community center, like a fire station. Now, one of the things that we've learned, and we don't have a lot of time to go through it, It was, how do you self-govern? Use a board. Most people are used to boards like in corporations. But there's a problem. There is a big difference between cooperatives and corporations that are there for investment, for making money, where cooperatives are member-centric. And the regular corporations, Title 16, they are board-centric. And the board moves according to the investors. Whereas in a cooperative, you have one share, one vote. Now, we ran into a problem as we got into this, because when there were certain opinions, 51% of the people thought this and 49% of the people thought this, but you had a vote, so the 51% went, but all of a sudden you have 49% that are disenfranchised. So the fracturing started to happen. Now, keep in mind, you only know what you know, and you don't know what you don't know. So our learning curve has been like this in a lot of different issues. And so we'll go through some of those things, but I want to point out right here, this is a representation of what we've learned and what we're doing in our second project down in Mesa, Arizona, where we have 1,300 acres. But we've really learned the peer method. You plan, you implement, you evaluate, and then you re-implement. And that works whether it's in your self-government or your own project. And understand it's way cheaper to do it on paper than it is to go out and dig a bunch of dirt and change it and then go, oh, I didn't think about this or I didn't think about that. So we have a learning curve to go on there. But the peer method, no matter what you do, you never fail if you learn from what you just did. Okay? That's progress. Now, the Pareto principle, he was an economist a long time ago, but he found out that 20% of our activities account for 80% of our productivity. So if you're like me, I want to be able to do less and get more done. So if you can stop and think about, okay, what works the best? Chickens or rabbits? Well, then you have to decide, oh, why do I want chickens or rabbits? And you get in and look at it, and you find out maybe I want both. But you got to understand why, and then you can start doing triage on your time. Because everybody has so much time. Isn't that right, Nate? When you get out there, the demand on your time is everywhere. So you have to decide what is wanted and why, and go back to the peer method, but really understand what it is you want. Now, I'm going to tell you right up front, we did a survey of a bunch of our people. Why would you come out in the middle of the dry desert? Now, I got to tell you, where you're planting is way different than where I'm planting. But when I grow a 40-pound pumpkin, I'm pretty excited after having to plant 60 pumpkins and figure out how to deal with the mice and the voles. But you get it figured out. So what is wanted? Okay, we come back to the vision of OSR. Okay. Helping families transition from a city lifestyle. Okay, that doesn't mean that you have to come out of the lifestyle. I'm going to tell you something I should have told you right up front. Find out what you are supposed to do and then hurry up and do it. Time is short. Figure out what you are supposed to do. If you're supposed to shelter in place, or if you're supposed to be relocate, if you're supposed to do something, find out what you're supposed to do and hurry up and do it. Time is short. There is sufficient time to do what we need to do. To a country culture, doesn't mean you got to go to the country culture of self-reliance. Think of the great grandparents that we had, the little 10-acre or 100-acre farm or whatever they had. All right. That went through the Depression. They didn't throw stuff away. I remembered when you repaired toasters. Things have changed. I remember you'd take your shoes in and you'd get 2 or 3 different soles put on it and it would go through. Life has changed. You use the peer method. You plan, you implement, you evaluate, and then you re-implement. You don't stop. You keep moving with like-minded neighbors, okay? People who want to be self-reliant, people who have integrity. Why is integrity so important? Because people have to know that they're going to do what they say they're going to do. I've interviewed hundreds of people for the co-op and that, and it's interesting. There's a lot of people that will tell you what they think you want to hear so they can get what they think they want. And so taking that opportunity to talk to them, what is their transition plan? So there's a lot of things. While remaining debt-free. That is a challenge. Now we're going to talk about you have to have plans and strategies. We just listened to what people are doing at a high government level. I want you to just ask this question right here. Are you a person that's waiting for the top down to take care of you? Or are you a person that says, okay, maybe I'm the person that has to take care of me. Maybe I'm going to have to be self-reliant. Maybe I'm going to have to be self-sufficient. Maybe everybody else is going to have their own challenges. Like say, we took a survey, and I didn't finish that, but the survey said that people came out or wanted to participate in our agricultural cooperative for one of 3 reasons, one or more. The 3 reasons. One was safety. Some things now, maybe things in the past or in the future. Another was health. It's amazing what we're being bombarded, what's happening to the health of our younger generation, not to mention us all generation. But the last thing is they wanted a safe place to raise family and food. That was the bottom line. They wanted a safe place to raise family and food. So that comes back to what is it you're preparing for? I'm not a doom and gloomer, but I just want you to know the research shows that there's 6 things that are going to happen to us, and it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And one of the number ones is an extended power outage that will last 1 to 3 years. And a lot of reasons for that. So you do the math, you think, how is that going to affect you if your lights go out? So we'll keep that in mind, because when you're preparing every needful thing, there's some different things to look at. This is my plot plan for my 2 acres. And by the way, guys, it's not what you have, it is what you do with what you've got. All right, we're going to talk about and skim on a lot of this stuff here. I want to make sure my clock is still running. I want to make sure we have plenty of time. This 2 acres here, keep in mind, that's 87,120 square feet. People say you cannot feed a family on 2 acres. Well, I'm here to tell you that the USDA and multiple universities have shown that you can feed an adult the nutritional needs in 120 square feet of garden bed. So if you divide that almost 90,000 square feet by 120 square feet, I ought to be able to feed a few people. Now, why would that be important to me? I'm the oldest of 18. My mom had 14 and she passed away when there's still 8 kids at home. Dad remarried, had 4 more, so there's 18. The story I'll just throw in real quick here. When there was 14 and mom and dad, there was 7 boys, 7 girls, and we had a table, an old eagle claw table that was 12 feet long, and 7 girls, 7 boys. The baby girl was by dad, went all the way. The oldest girl was on mom's right-hand side, and the littlest boy, my brother Adam, was on mom's left-hand side, and then it went all the way around, and I was on dad's right-hand side. Guess where the food started? It was dad, right next to me, and the baby girl. And so it went around all the way around, and there was always plenty of food. But I learned if you wanted the really good stuff, it didn't always make it back the second time. So I learned to get everything I wanted. I really learned how to pack a plate. And then I married an only child. About 3 months into our marriage, she started crying. I said, "What's the matter? You don't like my food?" I said, "No, I love your food, but you never take seconds." And I thought a minute, and I said, "Well, what is that?" But food is a critical issue, and that becomes part of preparing every needful thing. Well, let me back up here. Just a couple of things just to point out here. This 2 acres is set up with a passive solar home. It's 3 phases, and the first phase is 90% done. We got our certificate of occupancy. We live in it. It's a passive solar home. We will talk about that in a little bit because that's critical in your planning for the future. Whether you live in the city, whether you live out somewhere else, this is set up for food production. I have a 1,600 square foot greenhouse. By the way, I will let you know that my rabbit manure produced me 12-foot tall tomato plants. We don't have time. I wish I could show you a lot of pictures, but amazing things. But this is set up. It's 210 by 420. That's 2 acres. And some people put their barn in the corner, but I didn't want to walk 400 feet every time I needed a shovel. So I put my barn in the middle. My house is right here. My greenhouse is back here. I have 60 fruit trees in that back part. And because my animals are the things that I deal with the most, they're closest to the house. So I have my chickens and I have rabbits, and I have reasons for each one of those. And then I have a grazing area. But the one point I want to put in here is nitrogen cycle. It's not a carbon cycle, it's a nitrogen cycle. The objective is to be able to feed 40 to 50 people. Because if food gets too expensive, somebody loses a job. The very people that thought dad or grandpa was totally insane going out in the middle of the desert are now saying, "How's the project, Dad?" As I bring them a 40-pound pumpkin, or I take them in watermelons, or I take them in squash or eggs. They're now seeing the fruit. They're realizing, oh, maybe grandpa is tied on to something here. Now, I just quickly on this passive solar versus net zero. Everybody familiar with what net zero is? In other words, you produce more electricity or as much electricity as you use in power. Okay? What if your power goes out? What happens in the winter? It turns into a freezer, unless you have an envelope that can maintain the heat inside in the winter or outside in the summer. Passive solar means that you can heat and cool. My home right now, though it's only first phase, will stay between 60 and 90 degrees, whether it's 0 degrees outside or 105 degrees outside. For less than a hair dryer, I can keep it between 72 and 74, 800 square feet. So it's how you build it. And we don't have time to go into that because we could, each one of these subjects that we're just grazing over the top, we could spend hours with. In fact, we actually have training for those things. Right here, the USDA and universities. I mentioned that 120 square feet. You can actually, and this is set up here, this is research that we got from the USDA, that for 720 square feet of growing bed, which is in my one greenhouse that I have, I can feed a family of 6. All their nutritional needs. They actually lay it out as your leafy greens, your root vegetables, your cauliflower, all you needed so that you get the nutritional needs. Now, I got to tell you, heirloom seeds is a different ballgame than your hybrid. Heirloom seeds have had to be reproduced 75 years in a row prior to all of the GMOs. One example, most of your tomatoes now are picked while they're green because they've been genetically modified so that they won't spoil sitting on the shelf. And they'll take a truckload of tomatoes in and they'll submit it to a gas that changes the chemical composition to turn your tomatoes red. Okay? So the tomatoes and the other fruits and vegetables have been modified. All you got to do is do a little research in the health of the nation. I'm in charge of a church steak preparedness fair. Last year, I came across an article that was a journalist that had interviewed the top 6 CEOs of food producers in the United States. It was interesting. She asked him a lot of questions, but one question that stood out was, are you concerned about the health of your customers? Across the board, no. Our responsibility is getting people to eat food so that we can make money for our investors. That's the business we're in. Okay? As a consumer, you might consider, okay, what is wanted and why? Food production, critical. Those that had grandparents and parents that were back in the Depression might remember the Liberty Gardens. These are things to consider when you're creating a community, setting aside enough land so that the individuals can be sustained. So that if power goes out, we're not going to freeze to death. So that's the reason we say the next step in sustainable communities. What is it you're preparing for? Title III. Title III is the Utah Code for cooperatives and associations. Title III versus regular corporations is for the mutual benefit of all the members, not the mutual benefit of the investors. Whole different ballgame. we could spend all day talking about the advantages of Title III over 16. But if people are concerned about investment, you may want to use a corporation. But if you're concerned about a sustainable community, truly consider this. Now, I want to point out something that we had a great deal of discussion on. It's an agricultural producer. Okay? We went through the feds, we went through the states, we went through the county. A lot of people say you have to sell. Well, if you really get into it and read it, no. You have to have a chicken, or you have to grow a fruit tree, or you have to have a rabbit, or you have to be working with fertilizer and developing your soil. Those are all agricultural producers. You do not have to sell commercially to be an agricultural producer. So if you can get past that and understand that, you define in your own organization what you want as an agricultural producer. It's member owned, democratically controlled. Understand that sociocracy, which is also another name for dynamic self-management, it's getting a consensus. That's really important, and it takes a lot of time and effort. But I will tell you, if you will take the patience and learn why your neighbor thinks different than you can work together. And we had, Wilf did a great presentation last night. And so I highly recommend following up. But right here, the difference between traditional board governance. Just understand the communication is got to be. So seek to understand before being understood. And then you might understand yourself better by the time you think through both sides, or all 5 sides, or all 50 sides of an element. And I learned a lot yesterday because I've actually seen this stuff where one individual will influence others. In other words, the very things that he was talking about, we were sabotaging ourselves. In other words, the one individual would stand up and dominate, and people didn't want a conflict. And so things went south in a couple areas, but it's all getting worked out. Because if you have a bunch of good people, it's really hard to get them to go the wrong way for a long period of time. But it does take some time and patience. Sociocracy replaces hierarchical control. The co-op is not based on somebody's deep pockets. Co-op is not based on somebody who is charismatic. The co-op is based on one share, one vote. They are member resident owned. They own the property altogether. For example, our co-op, every member owns 1/250th of the whole thing. But they get a proprietary occupancy agreement, which is different than a lease, because you actually are an part owner of the land. But when you're working together, it's amazing what happens. It's not like a subdivision where everybody's isolated and got their own thing. You have to be concerned about your neighbor. You have to look at things. How is it going to affect my neighbor if I do this? How is it going to affect my grandma or my others? We have a project in Mesa, down by Mesa, 1,300 acres. Oops. Something went away, guys.